YouTube, welcome to part 4 of the Educated Barbarian focused on how to lead a happy life. If you remember, we actually finished on the chapter that concerned itself with philosophy as the guide of life. And we ended up with a pretty strong paragraph, one that I encourage you to revisit, because today we're moving on to chapter 5, which is called The Force of Precepts. In this chapter, the main focus is discussing what some would consider to be quotes or guidelines that can just be strictly applied to your life. And in French, we call this les morales. You can call that a parable as well. The entire idea behind it is that they're either just straight up sentences or stories that give you an insight on how to do things. And here it's going to be, of course, about how to lead a happy life. Because the precepts, exist as a driving force that help you actually seek out what is going to make you the most happy. And that we have already established is going to be virtue. So we already know that this is what we are going to be pursuing today with said precepts. There seems to be so near an affinity betwixt wisdom, philosophy, and good counsels that it is rather a matter of curiosity than of profit to divide them. Philosophy being only a limited wisdom, and good counsels a communication of that wisdom, for the good of others as well as of ourselves. So we pick back from what we left last time, where there was a clear attempt by our friend Seneca to actually establish something that would resemble a hierarchy of importance in terms of seeking virtue. And that led to philosophy existing as several entities. What I appreciate here is that he offers different gradas of things that are going to lead us to our happiness. And it seems that wisdom, philosophy, and good counsels are the three heads of the same beast. Because dividing them, as he says, is really just a matter of curiosity. It doesn't add anything. And anyone who tries to separate them and try to pin them against one another would be actually culpable of attempting something that resembles a sacrilegious offense of sorts. Because in reality, you're talking about the same thing. And I cannot help but think of volume, intensity, and frequency when I read that. Because it's the same thing. You cannot separate those concepts, and you cannot say that one is better than the other. That is just purely stupid. It's the same here. But philosophy is painted as limited wisdom. So wisdom is a more, in general term, a source. Right? It's a concept that philosophy only represents a very small portion of. And good counsels is an even smaller portion of it. So if you have wisdom that is like this, you have philosophy that is like this, and within philosophy is the ability to give good counsels that is also a part of wisdom. And in reality, we go, and that's something that the Stoics are extremely proficient at, we go from pure theory to practice. Wisdom in itself is theoretical. It's really tough to explain wisdom. And then you go down all the way to good counsels, and you understand that these are just purely practical, and that's what precepts are. The wisdom of the ancients as to the government of life was no more than certain precepts, what to do and what not. And men were much better in that simplicity. For as they came to be more learned, they grew less careful of being good. Very interesting. You can think that the absolute that we want to reach is wisdom. It's that entirety. But here, Seneca tells us that this might not be the case at all. Because if you manage to attain that, you might lose sight of the particularity of it and what it's supposed to be, which is you attain wisdom to be able to then give good advice to people and to yourself. So if you just stick to that concept and that thing that in reality is very impractical, then you're missing the point entirely. And what is said here is that maybe men in ancient times were less versed in wisdom, less adept at philosophy, but they were much better at actually applying it, and therefore they were actually much happier. And that makes a ton of sense in my opinion. Because the more you learn, the less you really try and understand why you're learning. Learning for learning's sake is good, it's called curiosity, but it's not the end-all be-all of human life. Human life is much simpler than that in reality. And since you're going to grow more learned and more knowledgeable, you're going to be less careful of being good because you're not applying the knowledge to be good. That plain and open virtue is now turned into a dark and intricate science, and we are taught to dispute rather than to live. I think this is perfectly represented in the way we handle science nowadays as a society of people. A lot of people don't really like science because they learn things that actually help them. They like science because it makes them feel superior, because it helps them crush people in arguments, and especially it helps them actually devalue other people's arguments via quote-unquote science. And that is not virtue, that is the exact opposite of virtue. There is absolutely no need in that, it is just counterproductive. Every man knows his duty to his country, to his friends, to his guests, and yet when he is called upon to draw his sword for the one, or to labor for the other, he finds himself distracted betwixt his apprehensions and his delights. He knows well enough the injury he does his wife in the keeping of a wench, and yet his lust overrules him, so that it is not enough to give good advice, unless we can take away that which hinders the benefit of it. Very intricate, a lot of examples to get to a very simple truth, one that I know a lot of people don't get, or if they get it, they go to an extreme and they miss the point. What he's saying here is simple. There is absolutely no point in giving advice and telling people to pursue virtue if you're just telling them that they must do it, or if you just give the benefit. Instead, you need to also have a portion of negativity, and you have to be able to tell people, okay, here is what would happen if you weren't virtuous. Here are the negatives. And I know that because philosophy has been correlated with morals, and morals have been correlated with being kind, we have reached a point where it is sort of accepted that anyone who thinks, especially on the concept of living a virtuous life, is going to be held to a certain standard, a standard that does not accept negativity. And the problem is that all of the gurus of positivity lack one thing, and that thing is bite. You need to be able to point out the evil in the world if you wish to defeat it. That is a very important lesson. So it's not enough to just know what the good advice is, or to give it to people or apply it. You need also to make sure that you remove anything that could stay in the path of people actually following that advice. And that is going to be immediate gratification and all of the things that in reality stay in the path of virtue, because it's quite easy for me to sit there and preach to you that you must be virtuous, but I cannot compete with your dopamine receptors. I cannot compete with that one habit that you know is bad, but you keep doing because it just feels good. This is stronger than me. But if I can actually face that thing directly and tell you, hey, you know that thing you're doing? Yeah, that's bad. Well, I'm removing that obstacle from your path. I'm being negative, sure. Maybe I'm making you feel bad. But I'm opening up a road for you to become virtuous. That is quite important. And not everyone will be lucky enough to have someone do it for them. And I can tell you that it's something I dealt with recently. When it's you who has to do it and you have to remove your own obstacles, it's much tougher because you're simply not objective enough, because your emotions are playing a big part in it. So it's something that you must work on. He that does well by chance may do ill, so too. And that is a good conclusion to that very idea. If you do something and you're virtuous, and you don't know why you're doing it, you don't understand the end goal, then maybe yes, you're virtuous in the moment, but are you virtuous really? I argue that no, and Seneca also says the same thing. Basically, the problem here is that since you're not cognizant of what you're doing, then you could have very well done evil as well, and you wouldn't even have realized the difference, because you have lost sight of the results of the advice. And this is what is spoken here. Too many people know the theory, but never the practice, and the theory without the practice is completely worthless. Precepts are of great weight, and a few useful ones at hand do more toward a happy life than whole volumes or cautions. And this is simply because a precept is actually knowledge condensed. I think at some point, and I say at some point, it's going to be like in a few years, we're going to read Les Fables de La Fontaine together, which a lot of people think are just tales for kids, but actually contain a ton of virtue. And these are maybe a page long, and they're little stories, parables, but they contain so much valuable wisdom that in reality, just like he says here, each of them is worth a full volume. So do not believe that knowledge is only judged by the length or the voluminous capacity of whatever you're receiving. I can tell you that there are certain books, certain paragraphs of books you'll read that are going to make a better difference in your life than years and years of classroom waiting for the teacher to finally teach you something important. Any book contains life-changing information. It's just up to you to find it. It is by precept that the understanding that is nourished and augmented. A precept delivered in verse has a much greater effect than in prose. And those very people that never think they have enough, let them but hear a sharp sentence against avarice, how will they clap and admire it and bid open defiance to money? So it is by precept that the understanding is nourished and augmented, which shows that a lot of people know that this is virtuous and this is not. They already have that knowledge in their heads, but it is something that they never actually apply to their life. And so when they're faced with a precept that forces them to consider it practically, then suddenly all of that knowledge that was dormant in them awakens and they realize, oh, that is correct. And that is something that is true across the board. And this is why books can awaken you to truth that you always perceived but never actually were revealed to you. And as he says here, those in verse are much better. And I do not have a direct idea as to why. If you know, let me know. It's interesting. But it is true that usually poesy and poetry is a very strong, it's a very strong and potent way to make people see the errors and mistakes of their condition. And I think I have an idea why. I think it's because it's less, how could I say that? It is less condescending. Because when you read a sentence that is straight up telling you, okay, this is wrong, then you can have an ego jerk reaction and you can just refute that. But when you read poetry, it doesn't feel like it's directed towards you. It feels like something that is thrown up in the air, and the lyricism of it allows the message to be carried forth. I think this is that. When you want someone to take a bitter medicine, you mix it with honey. And I think the honey is the actual verse, and prose is just water. So if I'm mixing very bitter medicine with water, you're not going to want to drink it. It is great virtue to love, to give, and to follow good counsel. If it does not lead us to honesty, it does at least prompt us to it. The most agreeable music arises from these chords. So should a wise man gather many acts, many precepts, and the examples of many arts to inform his own life. So first part, all of those values that are seen as virtuous, even if they do not directly make us honest and virtuous, they at least show us the way. This is the thing with those precepts as well. If you read one of them, maybe you're not going to apply it immediately, but you are conditioning yourself to accept it as valuable. And that is the first step, because in reality, a man that never sees virtue as something that is worth acquiring will never acquire it, because why would he? But by seeing it put in writing and seeing an example of what it could do to your life, you're doing the first step towards virtue. And this also leads to an idea that I think is important, and it's why I appreciate the Stoics, because you can clearly tell that when they are working in unison, and they're not writing a book saying this is the one book and the other ones suck. There is a clear will to build upon what the ancestors left and to create something that the descendants can also write about and expand. So in reality, there are no Stoic authors. There is one Stoic author. It's just that he changes name every generation. and he always takes from his predecessors and makes something even better with it, which is important because a lot of people are it's an expression that I like. They are men of one book. They read one book, and usually it's always philosophy, and that's it. That's who they are for the rest of their life. And if they are introduced to contradicting ideas, they will reject them immediately because their first book is like their first lover. They will never let go of it. But that is a problem because philosophy is not a team sport. You're not supposed to just say, okay, I read On the Happy Life by Seneca, I am therefore a Stoic for life, and the only Stoic I like is Seneca. No, Seneca himself would see you and tell you, hey, you're misguided. Not only do you need to read other Stoics, but you need to expand beyond Stoicism because you don't want to be the man of one book. Because precepts are creating discord, but in this case it's good because it offers you many options and it opens up an horizon of knowledge. And this is why you might be a little bit shocked because when we're going to start Nietzsche, you're going to see that I'm going to espouse what Nietzsche says. It's for one reason. When I read a book, I try to really make that philosophy my own. It doesn't mean that it's what I become. I don't start only believing in that. Every single philosophy is in my brain, and I have a mix of it because in reality, every single good book of philosophy written by someone who understands reality doesn't contradict its brethren. It completes them always. And I can prove that across the board. But I think I will, because when we start discussing nihilism, quote unquote nihilism, you know what I mean, you will find that many aspects of Stoicism are also found in the doctrines of Jung, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky. Good counsel is the most needful service that we can do to mankind. And if we give it to many, it will be sure to profit some. For of many trials, some or other will undoubtedly succeed. He that places a man in the possession of himself does a great thing. I find myself represented here because it's what I believe too. I think that giving advice to people and teaching them things is the best thing you can do in this life, even if it's not a one-to-one carryover. I know that a lot of people are going to listen to what I say and they're just going to either just straight up disagree, or it won't get anywhere. It's just not going to get anywhere because it'll stay at the surface level of theory. They'll never actually practice it. But some of you guys actually practice it and your life is becoming better. Because there's always a distinction to make between those who are going to just fail and those who are going to succeed, right? And that does one thing. It doesn't place you in my possession. It's something that I fight actively. Just like Seneca would have never accepted that you became his disciple. Rather, it's placing you in your own possession, meaning that you start becoming able to just live your life happily and the way a man or woman should live their life, which is as their own master. That is what virtue does to you, by the way. And the good thing is that you're going to be able to do that to other people as well when you become more learned. That is also the point of developing that virtue, is something that you can actually pass to people. It is an eminent mark of wisdom for a man to be always like himself. And I agree with that too. It is something that you need to also think about. Don't misconstrue it and think that you must stay rigid. No, you're ever evolving, but you're ever evolving because you wish to stay yourself. And that might be contradictory, but understand one thing. In 3 years, you will not recognize the person you were 3 years ago, and maybe you'll even be a little bit ashamed of the person you used to be. And that is good, because it means that you're evolving and that you're sharpening yourself intellectually and physically. And on top of that, it leads you to be who you are, because I personally think that if you stop, like if you decide that that's it, that's who you are and you're not moving forward, well, you're not being yourself anymore. You're being an old version of yourself that refuses to update its database. And that is terrifying because in the video about boomers, I discussed that is how you end up just being an empty husk with no value and nothing to stand for. But always make sure that you develop the courage to be yourself. Never change for other people. Change because you see virtue in the change. That is wisdom. I will remember always that I pray for a good mind. Also, that I am a man, and then consider that if I am happy, it will not last always. If unhappy, I may be. Okay, this one is tough to read, I'm sorry. Let's start again. I will remember always that I am a man, and then consider that if I am happy, it will not last always. If unhappy, I may be other if I please. I will carry my life in my hand, and deliver it readily when it shall be called for. I will have a care of being a slave to myself, for it is a perpetual and shameful and the heaviest of all servitudes. So, probably one of the toughest sentences I've ever read from Seneca, whose style is actually very easy to digest most of the time. So, what he means here is this: you always keep in mind that you are a man, and that happiness or unhappiness are just choices, and not only choices, they're optional and they're not permanent, they're temporary. And therefore, they have no impact on the way you carry your life. Right? It's a temporary coloring of your existence. Just because your existence is dark or black for a few months doesn't mean that it needs to end. And just because it's yellow and happy for a while doesn't mean that it's going to always be that way. But what remains is the same. Your existence is untouched. It's still there. After that, it's a question of preservation, of not hanging to life when it is your time to go, and to never become a slave to yourself. And you can ask yourself, okay, what is that even? Well, of course, being a slave to others is terrifying, but you will find that it's something that not rarely happens because it happens every day, but is much more obvious. Because when you're being made a slave by others, there are clear impacts on your life and consequences. Whereas if you become a slave to yourself, there's no culprit, there's no physical entity that is forcing you to do things you don't like. You're just being a slave to the person that you are. And that is the heaviest of all servitudes because it is perpetual, shameful. So therefore, it's going to, on top of that, be almost impossible to get rid of because when you are your own worst enemy, first off, just accepting that is tough. A lot of people will never be able to do that because you need a deep level of introspection to get to that level. Then you have to accept that you're toxic to yourself. That is a blow to your ego. A lot of people resist that. They'll never accept that they are their own worst enemy, ever. And this is also the reason why most people who are slaves are not slaves to someone, they're slaves to themselves. And so we could ask, what is that themselves? Well, I believe that the themselves is the portion of them that is not seeking virtue. And so you could say that it's the animalistic portion of their being versus the human version, the one that is actually more conscious, whereas this one is more instinctive and instinctual. And it's very easy to just become a slave to your instincts because they are instincts, they are not learned, they are encoded in us and they have a strong power and role on us. But this is why you need philosophy to counterbalance them. Philosophy is the book that opens up and is full of precepts that lead essentially to wisdom and virtue. He that would make a trial of the firmness of his mind, let him set certain days apart for the practice of his virtues. Let him mortify himself with fasting, coarse clothes, and hard lodging, and then say to himself, is this the thing now that I was afraid of? So, a certain praise and an invitation towards asceticism that is not directly correlated with the mortification of the self. It's more than that. He's not telling you, you need to fast so that you strengthen your spirit. No. He's telling you fast because it is going to show you that it's not something that you should be afraid of. Letting go of physical properties and letting the body suffer a bit will show to you that it's actually nothing. It's not something that you need to occupy yourself with. So, once this is established, you're going to be more free because these are not going to be waiting on you. You're not going to be afraid that they might happen because you're going to willingly make them happen and find that it's not that bad. If you will have a man resolute when he comes to the push, train him up to it beforehand. The soldier does duty in peace, that he may be in breathe when he comes to battle. And there's a quote that is very famous, by the way, I'm sure you've heard of it, that goes, if you want peace, seek war. Or strength, whatever. It's a synonym, it means the same thing. Because it's always better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And so, before life throws its difficulties at you, you must throw difficulties at yourself. Not just for the sake of hardship, but for the sake of preparing for hardship. And this is why, if you look at soldiers, you put soldiers through a training program that is so tough that when they get on the battlefield, it's still dangerous, of course, but it feels easy because they went through so much difficulty beforehand. And that is something that you can impose on yourself. It is very easy to do that. You don't want to take it too far, of course. It's still just a preparation. It's not the actual hardship. It is as easy to suffer it always as to try it once. And it is no more than thousands of servants and poor people do every day in their lives. So it's a comparison between the permanence of pain and the occurrence of it. If you've experienced pain and you talk to someone and you say pain, they know exactly what you mean. Why? Because pain is something that is a common human experience. In reality, if I wanted to really push it, I could say that it is the human experience. We've all experienced pain at some point or the other in our lives. And someone who had never been exposed to pain would be stunted. Like it would be a form of disability in a sense, because it's what reality is. Pain is just a painful reminder that you live in a body that is mortal. And so, since it is as easy to suffer it always as to try it once, the very concept of pain itself is rendered null and inoffensive in a sense. Because once you know pain, then it cannot surprise you anymore. And after that, he compares that to the fact that tons of people actually suffer pain and hardship and difficulties every day of their lives, and it's not their choice. You could compare that to the idea of trying to fight your own comfort and trying to put yourself in situations that might not ever be a real possibility for you. Let's say you have a very comfortable life. You're never going to go hungry. But going hungry wouldn't kill you because a ton of people go hungry every single day and are not dead yet. And so it might bring you closer to a state that might, again, still be an impossibility for you to ever enter, but that still exists in nature. And therefore, it's not the end of the world to try it. It is easier to give counsel than to take it, and a common thing for one choleric man to condemn others. This is almost a modern advice, because I hear people give that all the time, saying that it's easy to correct other people's way and tough to either correct your own or to actually take it. A lot of people like to criticize, not many people like to be criticized. A lot of people like to make jokes at the expense of others, but the second you make a joke about them, they get very upset. That is a flaw. Before you start critiquing others, you need to critique yourself. I personally live my life like this. I hold myself to a standard of 10. That's 10. People I love are at 7 or 6. Random people I don't know are at a 3. Meaning that I am much tougher on myself than I am on others, because I find that this is the healthy way to approach things. Since I cannot expect people to live their lives the way I live mine, but I can demand that they meet a certain standard to accept that they're doing their best. That is a give and take that I think needs to be established. Because if you're your own worst critique, any amount of criticism you receive is going to be welcome. Because it's never going to be as harsh as what you tell yourself. And as he says, a lot of people who end up always pointing the fingers and saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, they tend to themselves hate it when people do it to them. And on top of that, they're usually terrible people. The misery is that the wise do not need counsel, and fools will not take it. A good man, it is true, delights in it, and it is a mark of folly and ill nature to hate reproof. Very true, and also a catch-22 and paradox that he's exposing here. Someone who would receive criticism well, as I said, most likely is already their worst critique. So anything you tell them, they already know, so they don't need your advice, even though they would receive it very positively. The people that need criticism in their life are the ones that never critique themselves, but since they never do it, they're resistant to it. Those are fools. Anyone who gets upset when you tell them something, in good faith, of course, not a personal attack, is an idiot, because it's like they're being handed a possibility to better themselves and they shrug and frown at it because they feel like they're being told that they're not worth it, that they suck, and that's not the case. See criticism as a ladder. It's someone putting a ladder next to you and saying, hey, here's something for you to climb on. Would you get upset at that person and say, oh, are you calling me short? Are you saying that I need a ladder to climb? No, they're just helping you. You need to accept that and move on. The best people I know, the people that are the most advanced, are people who take criticism extremely well and they welcome it. They actually thrive from it. Now, let's see where we're standing. Very well. I wish to continue because I want to do chapter 5 and 6 today. This is a quote from Marcellinus, and this is something that is very interesting. It's what I call moral relativism, and it's something that people who do not like criticism tend to do a ton. Let me read it and then we'll get back to it. I'll discuss it in more details. Marcellinus said, as if you philosophers did not love your whores and your guts as well as other people. And then he tells you of such and such that were taken in physicians, but it is yet lawful for a man in an hospital. Wait, what? Okay. And then he tells you of such and such that were taken in the manner. We are all sick, I must confess, and it is not for sick men to play the physicians. But it is yet lawful for a man in an hospital to discourse of the common condition and distempers of the place. Okay, sorry for messing that up. It's a weird paragraph. There's a quote, and then there's an indirect quote followed by a direct message from Seneca. So essentially there's three parts. One, Marcellinus, who is an intellectually dishonest nihilist in a sense, who is basically saying, well, you philosophers, you say all of that stuff about virtue, but you still love women and you still love food and whatever, so you're just like other people. And he continues by saying that that philosopher or this one, they got caught in the matter, and so it proves that you are all just liars. You tell people do this and do that, but you yourself don't apply it in your life. This is very vicious, actually. This is the sign of someone who's just intelligent enough to be dangerous in an argument, but not intelligent enough to actually create value or wisdom or virtue. They can't tap into it. And these types are the ones who are constantly trying to deconstruct. It's something that Seneca already explained, is deconstruction as a whole is the job of the idiots. It's the job of the resentful, because it is not building any value or anything that is worth discussing. As I said at the start, negativity is necessary, but when you're negative, what you do is you destroy what you consider evil or unworthy, and then you build upon it. If you were to only destroy and then just sit tight and say, well, my work is done, well, no, because maybe even though you might have destroyed something negative, since you're not replacing it with anything, the laws of chaos dictate that something even worse is going to emerge. And that's what Marcellinus is essentially saying. He's saying, well, philosophy and wisdom and virtue is worthless because you, the teachers of it, don't actually practice it. And then he uses examples in real life to actually make his point even more poignant. And what Seneca says is that he admits that, yes, we're all sick. And that it is not for sick men to play the physician. So essentially he admits and he accepts the idea that philosophers are not above the rest, they're not floating above the crowd, they are still just normal men And therefore, the way they give advice is not giving advice as someone who is looking down upon children and teaching them how to live because they themselves are flawless. If anything, the philosopher will admit his faults to create a connection with the person he teaches so that he can actually impress upon them the importance of virtue. And to me, it's important to admit that we're all sick. Because if philosophers are as sick as the rest, as their readers, then it must mean that the amount of wisdom they deploy is accessible to the reader. So again, beautiful work by the Stoics, making the readings of philosophy accessible to everyone. And even though it is not for sick men to play the physicians, it's lawful for a man in an hospital to discourse of the common condition. And that sort of destroys that argument. It's an argument that I think has a name. I'm sure it has a name. It's an intellectual fallacy of sorts. It's what I think it's been coined recently. It's like whataboutism. Whataboutism. And it's essentially people who, when you expose them like a mistake or error or something that needs to be corrected, they say, okay, but what about this? It's the same, so why not correct that? But they don't really want to correct that either. They just want you to drop it. And it's incredibly common with people who are intellectually dishonest. It's a way for them to misdirect your attention and make you look like a hypocrite because, well, if you do this and you say this, then it also applies to that, so why not this? Well, what Seneca says is, well, you are correct. I am not someone who's perfect, but because I am not someone who's perfect, I have the ability to discuss my human condition and tell you that this is right and not, this is correct or not correct. It's the whole do as I say, not as I do thing, which always applies to people you take advice from. Because even on this channel, you listen to me, maybe I'm honest and maybe I actually live my life by those philosophies and those precepts, but you have no proof. Are you going to use that for a reason to not do it just because you have no proof? No, you'll do it because who cares if I'm virtuous? What matters is if you are virtuous yourself. And even if I am not, the only thing you could say is, well, maybe you're not virtuous and you're trying to guide me down a path of destruction. The issue, of course, being that if that were true, you would see a direct negative impact on your life. If there is no such thing, then surely you are becoming more virtuous. So even if it comes from someone who might be not virtuous, it's still worth listening to. It is quickened, and I yet again lose my line. It is the first and the main tie of a soldier, his military oath, which is an engagement upon him both of religion and honor. In like manner, he that pretends to a happy life must first lay a foundation of virtue as a bond upon him to live and die true to that cause. This is touching on the question and idea of principles, an idea, by the way, that is also under attack by people like Marcellinus, who hate the idea that certain individuals have very strong notions of the world and who they are. These are the type of people that would want no one to hold strong opinions because most of the time they have no such thing themselves and therefore they feel inferior. Principles are quintessential to a happy life. Again, doesn't mean that you're inflexible, but I firmly believe that if you look at yourself as a building, a beautiful building, I hope, your principles make up la charpente. It's the structure, it's the beams that hold the entire thing together. If they're constantly flimsy and just switching around all the time, the structure is not going to hold. You're never going to be able to build something. These are things that are not up for negotiation. You believe firmly in them, and they are an integral part of who you are. Even if people disagree, you should stick to them, because most likely, if you have the guts to actually defend them against the opinion of many, then it must mean something to you, and so you must stick to it. And he compares that to a military oath, a firm engagement that might not be based on logic, but that allows you to build logic, and that is important. And that was the end of this chapter. So as you see, very interesting and a little bit meta too, because a lot of do's are precepts discussing precepts. And I think accepting the notion that precepts are very valuable to a happy life is the first step towards being able to receive them, first and foremost. Chapter 6 is named No Felicity Like Peace of Conscience. We're going to get into it, but before, I'm going to walk and grab my water bottle and give myself a little bit of a refreshment, then start again. I am now fully refreshed, and we can continue on our path towards a happy life. A good conscience is the testimony of a good life and the reward of it. When a man has gotten the mastery of his passions, placed his treasure and security within himself, learned to be content with his condition. So, we're again looking at the hierarchy of virtue, what leads us to virtue and what doesn't. If wisdom is the overarching theme and the potential book that must be opened to receive precepts is philosophy, and that precepts themselves lead to virtue that itself leads to a happy life, then the end result of all of this is a good conscience, because it is the summary of a good life. And also your reward, because happiness will be the state you're going to enter as you become more virtuous. So it's like a permanence. But then you have something that is more fixated in time, per se. And that is that good conscience. Because happiness is a state of flow. You're constantly happy because you're constantly content. Your good conscience can be pinpointed at moments, right? It's like in that moment you have good conscience. It doesn't mean that it's not lasting, but it's something that has a much stronger representation in the moment compared to happiness, at least I have found. And that is when you have gotten the mastery of your passions and you're fully secure with who you are and you're content. We have a veneration for all the works of nature, the heads of rivers, the springs of medicinal waters. The horrors of groves and of caves strike us with an impression of religion and worship. To see a man fearless in dangers, untainted with lusts, happy in adversity, composed in a tumult, and laughing at all those things which are generally either coveted, or feared, all men must acknowledge that this can be nothing else but a beam of divinity that influences immortal body. So, this description was the description of a man with a good conscience, with peace of conscience. And it's linked directly to nature. Because it is true that all of the time, the relationship we have with things and concepts and our environment, to me, cannot be summed up to culture. It's too easy and it makes no sense. Because across cultures, we all have very similar interactions with certain types of environments. So to me, this shows that there is also a theme to human life. And that theme to me is nature. Because we all evolved in nature, even though in different types of nature, but we're all the children of the same wood. And so our way to approach it and to look at things globally is extremely similar also. And that is the reason why there is no such thing as a society on Earth, a functional society at least, that doesn't revere virtue to one extent or another. The type of virtue might slowly differ, but it's never completely absent. And that is because virtue and a good conscience, which is the direct result of it, is something that truly looks to be divine. It's something that seems to come from a different world. And so we regard it with a lot of respect, of course. A great, a good, and a right mind is a kind of divinity lodged in flesh, and may be the blessing of a slave as well as of a prince. It came from heaven, and to heaven it must return. And it is a kind of heavenly felicity which a pure and virtuous mind enjoys. So, again, on the topic of divinity, a good conscience is an aspect of the divine. Because you must ask yourself, that actually is more complicated than it looks like. Because I think the concept of conscience in itself is divine, yes, but not applied to gods. Because I think that if you look at even monotheist or polytheist gods, they don't seem to have a conscience, do they? At least not in the sense that we mean. It's not that they're not actually conscious, but we have a sense of conscience because we are constantly emitting judgments of values about our own person. And if you think about it, it is because we are expecting to be judged. And again, this is what I meant when I told you that across the board, cultures as a whole have a relationship with nature that never really is too divergent to one another. Meaning that I personally don't think humans waited for the concept of God to exist to develop a conscience. I think that there's always been this idea that we're being judged by something greater than ourselves. And we integrate that as a conscience. Meaning that there is a chance, and I wasn't alive back then, but there is a chance that the reason why humans create gods is to give an explanation to that conscience. We want to understand what is that voice inside. And the answer that we give is that this voice is not our own. It's the voice of God. And that you can accept or reject, but I think the validity of that hypothesis is pretty high. And so, gods don't have that. I firmly believe that they don't have a conscience on that level because who are they trying to quote-unquote impress? Who are they trying to prove to that they are worthy and virtuous? Absolutely no one, right? So by default, they are. And they are not, because you cannot pass a judgment of value on God. Actually, I know that we have a lot of Christian and Muslim bros and Jewish bros on the channel, and I think you would agree with that. You would never allow yourself to pass a judgment of value on God's actions. Why? Well, he's your God, but it's more than that. It's because his actions cannot be bad. Because for his actions to be bad, it would mean that you are bringing God down to our level. To go back on the topic of Islam quickly, I remember talking to a Muslim bro, and he told me that regardless of what happens to you, it's Allah who wishes it, and it cannot be bad, right? You can perceive it as bad, but your God did not do that to hurt you. There's always a positive to be found. And this shows that an application of the conscious mind cannot exist without, in terms of actual belief in a God, the idea that this conscience is not connected to the God, meaning that you are being judged, but you are not allowed to judge, if you know what I mean. And I think that even if you don't believe in God, it is something that is very valuable because it brings back the idea that whatever happens to you, you are not to complain and say it's unfair. You can say it's unfair if you want to, but it's truly not. It's just neutral, and then it's up to you to do something about it, something that should be good, because you can turn it into something very beneficial. And that is when you receive divinity lodged in flesh. This is when you develop peace of conscience. And anyone can develop it, a slave or a prince, it doesn't matter. It came from heaven, as I described, because it's the judgment of God or nature that is leading us down that path, and it will return to heaven. Your conscience will eventually go back to nature. Where? We don't know, because it's not something physical. And it is, of course, pure. I am strangely transported with the thoughts of eternity, nay, with the belief of it. For I have a profound veneration for the opinions of great men, especially when they promise things so much to my satisfaction. For they do promise them, they do not prove them. Alright, so let's observe that. First off, Not often does Seneca speak in the first person. It's rare. He's like breaking the fourth wall here. And I find that he only does that when he has something that is really important to him to share. And here, after all of that description about conscience he gives, he lets you know that all of that is something that occupies him a lot. It's in his thoughts a lot. The idea of eternity. An idea that, in our world, is absent. Again, eternity is like your conscience. It's a divine concept because nothing is eternal that we can see. And yet, everything is eternal. It's just that we as non-eternal beings, lack the ability to perceive things that are, just like we, as beings with conscience, have a tough time understanding beings that do not have one. Like a God. It's the reason why les voies du Seigneur sont impénétrables. That's from Christianity, by the way, for the French Christians on this channel. The Lord's ways are impenetrable. You cannot understand the plans of a divinity because it would admit that you can penetrate their conscience and they don't have one. And so that's what he says as well. And he also links that to the veneration for the opinions of great men. Because if you believe in eternity, you believe that any amount of knowledge left behind is one for the taking, one, and forever as well. And I think that just by us being there discussing the writing of someone who was dead when we were still not born is proof of that directly. Eternity exists and we are experiencing it right now. And these people promise you great things, but they only promise them, they don't prove them. And that also speaks to the concept of eternity, I believe. No one has the ability to show to you that what they tell you will result in anything. The only way to get to it is to do it and to then achieve it or not. In the question of the immortality of the soul, it goes very far with me. A general consent to the opinion of a future reward and punishment, which meditation raises me to the contempt of this life, in hopes of a better. So, the immortality of the soul also speaks to the idea that at some point your soul will graduate this world. And again, religions have taken that and run with it, because a lot of religions will tell you that your life on earth is like a judge. It's a period of time where you get judged. It's like a test, and your real life will begin afterwards. Of course, Stoicism wasn't as advanced yet on that path, but you can see that it's something that Seneca was already thinking about, which leads to the contempt of this life in hopes of a better. And this is where I'm going to dig my heels in a little bit, because I don't always agree with everything that I read. And in this case, I firmly believe that it is extremely dangerous to constantly hope for a better future later, especially if you think that it's going to occur after death, because it can quickly lead to an unfulfilling and just very negatively fueled life, because you're expecting it to be all better afterwards, right? So today, like, this doesn't really matter. Well, I personally don't believe that. I think that it is a fault, and it's something that Stoicism has injected in Western philosophy as a whole, which is the detestation of the body. Now, don't get me wrong, Stoics were still really adept, and they understood that the vessel was important. But I think that the more advanced they became, the more they started to fail to apply their own advice. You know what Seneca said about not trying to become too knowledgeable, because then you lose sight of the practical aspect? Well, I think that that's it. By trying to become pure spirit, you by default also point out the body as something disgusting and lowly, and therefore you move away from it. But I believe that by doing so, you stop being human. You disconnect yourself with what makes you human. And that is very dangerous. It's something that you don't want to do. The body is but the clog and prisoner of the mind, tossed up and down and persecuted with punishments, violences, and diseases. But the mind itself is sacred and eternal, and exempt from the danger of all actual impression. So this is why he thinks this, right? He's thinking about eternity, and as he says, it's a concept that actually entices him a ton. But the problem is that there is an impossibility here. Because if we, as humans, do not have the ability to perceive things that are eternal, we have the power to perceive those that are not. And if anything, the human body is the best example that eternity is not a given, and that if it exists, it's certainly not concerning our human envelope that will eventually rot. Why? Because it's physical. You're made of flesh. Flesh decays with time and eventually it rots. That is the future of your body. And so it can be tempting to think that the spirit is just going to escape that prison and just become something greater than it. And therefore, if you're going to start thinking about eternity, you are by default going to demean the body because you're going to feel that it's just holding you down. But as someone like me, who believes that there is no life after death, at least not in that fashion, it is a fault. Because to me, if the spirit were to exit the body, it would be to then re-enter a body immediately. It's what I personally believe in. Meaning that your body is something you borrow, and when it expires, you just get a new one. It is not something that you just leave behind to become something greater, because that would mean that we as humans would return to a state that is akin to a god. And I think that this is an impossibility. It's something that is very tempting, but I don't think that's in the cards for us. I think that this boat has left a long time ago. We could have been that, but we were not created to be that. And actually, most modern religions agree with me, sorry. Humans were made of earth, right? So we are tied to the physical forever. Angels in Islam are made of, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to say something stupid, but I know that they're not made of dirt. Angels, I think, are made of light, and jinns are made of fire. And angels in the Christian religion are also made of light. They are not physical creatures. If anything, if you look back, the way angels were represented in the Ancient Testament wasn't even human. They didn't look human, they just looked like a shape. We gave them human proportions because it's easier for a human psyche to understand these creatures. But to me, they are pure spirit. They and the gods and demons, if you believe in demons, are pure spirit. They can take on a physical form, but they don't need one. We need one. We are tied to it. And the only way for the soul to escape it is for the death of the body to occur, but the spirit cannot survive without the body. That's my personal belief. So this is why I think that this is the portion of Stoicism where there starts to be a problem that arises, a problem that we're going to discuss with Nietzsche a ton, because he also has understood that this detestation of the body has led to a lot of problems. My cat just woke up. The common people take stomach and audacity for the marks of magnanimity and honor. And if a man be soft and modest, they look upon him as an easy fop. But when they come once to observe the dignity of his mind and his equality and firmness of his actions, the very same people have him in esteem and admiration. The reason is, we overvalue that which we must quit to obtain it. So all of that is back to virtue. As I told you, that paragraph about the eternity of the soul is a little bit strange. It still is in line with the idea of a conscience, but you can tell that it's something that he just wanted to put out there, and then he went right back to talking about virtue. So what Seneca means here is that virtue is an internal thing. You can teach people how to be virtuous. Oh no, she's stuck. Okay, I'm going to help my cat and then I'll come back. Yeah, she's stuck. Okay, you're good, you're good. You're good. Sorry. I was on kitty rescue. You know when your cat, like, she got her claws stuck in a, what is the name of that thing? Not a towel, like a blanket, and she's panicking like this. She's an old lady, she's 21, she needs all the help she can get. She's already asleep. She went right back to sleep. So, where was I? Yes, I was talking about virtue and the fact that it's internal, but that we have a tough time with internal principles because they're tough to teach. And I think that this is the reason why a lot of people are going to ascribe extremely strict guidelines and external factors to internal benefits or internal virtues. And I want to liken that to masculinity. If you talk to someone, even me, and you tell them, hey, what makes a man? Well, they'll tell you, like, oh, it's being strong, it's being big, full of will, a protector, etc. But all that is external. It's not internal. These are actions. Why? Because it's much easier to describe that than to actually go in details into the intrinsic qualities that you need to develop to be a man. And yet, it's not damaging at all because by being strong and being masculinely actionable, you develop those qualities within. The problem is when you start pointing out someone, for example, who's like small, and you say, well, you're small, so you're not a man. Well, no. Now you're using external factors to judge internal principles, and that is simply not possible. And that is what he said. We overvalue that which we must quit to obtain it. So a lot of the time, people are going to try and be virtuous. They're going to focus on the external and make a show of it. It's called virtue signaling. And by doing that, they're doing the exact opposite. Because they're not trying to be virtuous for themselves. They're trying to be virtuous so that others think that they are. And that is the exact opposite of virtue. A good conscience fears no witnesses, but a guilty conscience is solicitous even of solitude. If we do nothing but what is honest, let all the world know it. But if otherwise, what does it signify to have nobody else know it, so long as I know it myself? An excellent way to live your life, and a truth, by the way. If you do things that you know are correct and right, you're going to be perfectly fine with people knowing it. The second you start having to hide things, it's one of two things. Either you live in a society or surrounded by people who have different values than you have, and something that you believe is correct, they believe is incorrect, in which case, stop being a coward and just live your life. Don't let people influence you if it's one of your principles. Or you know deep down that it's not virtuous and therefore you hide it and you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Something that you cannot tell people in the open, most likely you shouldn't be doing in private. And as for credit and receiving praises for what you do, refrain from doing that. If it's honest, people can know it. But if they don't and you did something good and they don't know, who cares? You already did something honest, you did something good for the world. Wickedness, it is true, may escape the law, but not the conscience. For a private conviction is the first and the greatest punishment to offenders, so that sin plagues itself, and the fear of vengeance pursues even those that escape the stroke of it. So if we're talking practicality, you could say, okay, I'll be virtuous, but clearly there are people who are not virtuous that are very happy, because the crime sometimes can lead to profit. Well, that's not true. Crime never pays. Because un bien mal acquis ne profite jamais. Again, French. I know some people like it when I go slower. So, un bien mal acquis ne profite jamais. What this means is that something that you obtain, something physical or not, that you obtain in a dishonest way will never make you happy because you'll never be able to use it. And if you've read Dostoevsky, I'm not going to spoil, but there is a character that at some point kills an old woman and he obtains a chest full of riches and he just never makes use of it. He buries it and he doesn't want to touch it ever again. Why? Because his guilt is associated with the chest. And that is what is meant by it. Because your conscience is constantly with you. And therefore, it's the thing that is going to be the biggest punisher. Even if the society doesn't punish you, you will be punished by yourself. It were ill for good men that iniquity may so easily evade the law, the judge, and the execution. If nature had not set up torments and gibbets in the consciences of transgressors. He that is guilty lives in perpetual terror, And while he expects to be punished, he punishes himself. And whoever deserves it expects it. I love this one. What if he be not detected? He is still in apprehension yet that he may be so. So, it's the very same idea, and also a big reason why you should be virtuous and always have a good conscience. Having a guilty conscience will weigh on you constantly, and you can never turn it off. You cannot turn your conscience off. It will wake you up at night. It will ruin your best moments because it's that voice in you that is telling you that, hey, you did something terrible and something is going to happen. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Something is happening. You're destroying your own mental health and happiness yourself. You don't even need anyone to discover what you did. It doesn't matter. Actually, if someone discovered what you did, you would feel better because that weight would be removed. You would pay the price and move on. But if no one finds it, you're going to carry that weight on your shoulders for the rest of eternity. It is not the posture of the body or the composure of the bed that will give rest to an uneasy mind. True happiness is not to be found in excess of wine or of women or in the largest prodigalities of fortune. What she has given to me she may take away, but she shall not tear it from me. And so long as it does not grow to me, I can part with it without pain. So the first part is the idea that nothing eases the conscience quite as well as virtue that then leads to good conscience. But on the other side, things that would give you a bad conscience to start with are not where happiness lays. Not just because they lead to a bad conscience, which also is a sign that you preemptively know they're bad, so of course they have no potential to make you happy. But on top of that, if you regard these things as not representing true happiness, you can still enjoy them. You're not being told to become a monk, by the way. The Stoics never want you to become a monk. They want you to not be attached to the things that some people have defined as their one true happiness, which leads to bad faith and bad conscience. Because all of these things can be taken away from you, but if you accept that they could, then they cannot. That's what he says here. Yes, a woman can make me very happy and give me all of the affection in the world, but as long as I don't become attached and I don't let it become my one true path to happiness, I can part with it. It doesn't matter because there will be no pain because it has never grown on me. You don't want to let things grow on you because then they have an impact and an influence on your life. And this is when you develop bad conscience. And in terms of practical advice to actually achieve that, let us examine, observe, and inspect our own hearts. For we ourselves are our own greatest flatterers. It is my custom, every night, so soon as the candle is out, to run over all the sight of my own errors, when I can admonish and forgive myself. So here, I'm going to repeat that last paragraph afterwards, but the way to achieve a good conscience is simple. Do not get to the point where you develop bad conscience. Do not get to the point where you start fearing that others might know what you did. Be your own worst critic. As he says again, run over all the words and the actions of the past day and let nothing escape me. For why should I fear the sight of my own errors when I can admonish and forgive myself? By doing that, you are, in a sense, preventing a potential life where you become judged by others because every single time something arises, a vice, you will correct it immediately. And everything you do something virtuous, you will reinforce that practice so that you continue on that path. And there is no point in fearing your own mistakes because there is nothing to fear. You can just correct them. But if you fear them, you're never going to correct them. You're going to repeat them. The guilt is going to build itself up, which leads to a bad conscience, a heavy conscience. Our fate is set, and the first breath we draw is only the first motion towards our last. One cause depends upon another, and the course of all a great variety in our lives. All things, public and private, are but a long connection of providential appointments. So this is when we touch upon the idea of fate. A question that I want to link with what I discussed before about the very concept of eternity and the toxicity that is attached to it and what it became in the future, because I think fate is the same thing. But as a Stoic, fate is not colored with the same fatalistic mindset that many people have actually attached to the very idea that our lives could actually be predetermined, because it is said here that it's all but a long connection of appointments. Meaning that if there is such a connection, choices and options you have directed yourself towards will make differences. And so, the concept of fate works as an acceptation of what has passed, not as a prediction of what is to come. That is very important. Nature has made us passive, and to suffer is our lot. While we are in flesh, every man has his chain to carry. We are born to lose and to perish, to hope and to fear, to vex ourselves and others. And there is no antidote against a common calamity but virtue, for the foundation of true joy is in the conscience. And as the end word of the chapter, yes, we are born twisted and we're all born sick. We are all sick. But it's not a reason to do nothing, because at the end of the day, we are also born with the divine in us, a divine that is showing us what we should be, and that is not being sick. It is working towards virtue. And because that is the case, we have to do it, because the only other option is unhappiness. And so there is really no logical reason not to pursue virtue, that is, because it is the antidote against that calamity that is being a human. And since true joy is only found in the conscience, anything physical surrounding it are just byproducts. There are actions we can take so that the conscience is at peace, but never something to follow so that we are happy. Because if you constantly seek pleasure, there's a strong chance that you're going to have a bad conscience, so you are just missing the point entirely. And I'm going to leave you with that for today. As next chapters is named, A Good Man Can Never Be Miserable, nor a wicked man happy, which is in direct line of continuation with what we just discussed. But that will be for next time. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.